I think for those who have seen Les Miserables as far as the movie, maybe the musical, you know, we're looking at something that is from years ago. The French Revolution comes to mind, that whole era. We think of prisons as being pretty tough and pretty bad at this point. But I notice that you've written that the basic plight of the imprisoned and the paroled these days remains the same or similar to what was experienced back then. And I would say that comes as kind of a shock. Can you describe a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, mentally and psychologically, it's the same. Obviously, physically, there's not those conditions, although, frankly, in some prisons and jails, it is equivalent to that, with rats crawling through cells. But most of our prisons are hygienically clean. But the inmates are treated like scum. They're yelled at. I was in prison a little over 26 months, and during that time, well over 1,000 times, I had yelled or snarled at me, "You ain't got nothing coming," and it's said with hate. It basically says you're worthless. You come from nothing. You're going nowhere. Your life is worthless. And you know, prison fellowships volunteers and other, you know, Christian volunteers come in with the opposite message. We tell them, you have value. You're a child of God. You were created in His image and likeness, and you carry that divine spark within you. And no matter what you've done, you know, Jesus came and already paid the price for that. And if you take Him in your heart and you live according to His precepts, you've got a wonderful future ahead of you. So that's, you know, sort of a counter cultural message to the culture in prisons, which is that the inmates are filth. One vignette, and you hear this from so many prisoners, as they're released, the guard will say to them, "See you in a few months." They expect them to come back.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, because I don't think we see that perspective too much. So if, in fact, then, when you, as Prison Fellowship and the different divisions of Prison Fellowship, the volunteers come in and make a difference, it sounds to me as if your effort almost is pretty easy to do, just to show the hope that you're giving them, because apparently of the status of hopelessness that they're in at that moment.
You're absolutely right. It is easy. Although there's a culture within prisons to dismiss Christianity as a white man's religion, a sissy's religion, because we preach forgiveness, and prison is based on toughness. You know, the rule of the yard is, you know, you can take on all comers. So we're countercultural even to the prisoners. But yes, to those that are seeking a better way, we do offer them that hope. In fact, Chuck Colson often said, "Where is the hope?" It comes from the gospel. These people, we give the hope that they can have a better life, that their family can be restored, that they can be a contributing member of the community, that they can be a good neighbor. And we work with them and teach them how to be a good employee, how to, you know, keep Jesus in your heart, the disciplines of the faith. And it really is something that transforms their lives, because they go from hopelessness, feeling there is no way out of this life of crime, to where we show them that there is, that they have a great future ahead of them if they take Jesus in their heart.
All right, now, how many years ago was it that Chuck first started Prison Fellowship?
Oh, boy. It was 35, I think.
Okay. And you've been involved how many years now?
15 years.
Wow. Okay. In that period of time, whether the 35 or the 15, how has what Prison Fellowship is doing in the prisons changed?
It's now harder to get into prisons. They put our volunteers through more hoops. We take pride in good training for our volunteers, no incidents of problems, and yet still there are often hassles. A quick story: when I was in prison, I went to every Christian service that there was, and the Southern Baptist group from in Berkeley came and drove 2 hours out to visit us every 2 weeks. And we could see we were gathered in the chapel and all the volunteers there. And then they went away. And the guard came up and said, you've got to break up this meeting. You're not allowed to meet without any volunteers. Well, it turns out that those volunteers who'd been coming faithfully every 2 weeks were turned away because the guard had been playing computer games and hadn't run the list of visitors. Oh. And so he told them, you're not on the visitors list, go home. And, you know, that's not from any animus to religion, but it sure disappointed us. And think about them that had taken they'd been in services all morning. They got in their cars and drove out to see us. It was wonderful. They had members of the choir, they had the pastor, they had ladies and men, that were active in the church, and they all had to turn around and go home.
Get back to what you were mentioning before. It's tougher now to actually get into the prisons. What do you attribute that to?
Bureaucratic laziness. It's more work to let volunteers in. There are two types, and I don't want to paint all prison officials as bad. There are some wonderful prison officials and wonderful chaplains that really work hard to get volunteers to come in and to provide programs that uplift the inmates. But there are a lot of them that don't feel that way, and to them it's a lot more work to check in volunteers than if nobody comes to visit. Frankly, it's the same way with family visits. A lot of the guards are very rude and make it very uncomfortable for the families, whereas others, realize that an intact family that an inmate's going to turn their life around and be on the right path when they get out. But to those lazy guards, it's easier to discourage visiting, to discourage volunteers, because it means less work on their part.
I appreciate this inside look, because otherwise we wouldn't hear about this. Let me ask you about your approach now. You've been involved 15 years going into prisons. As you, as a part of Prison Fellowship, go into prisons, has your, I won't say style or technique, but has your approach changed in that period of time? Have prisoners changed and you've had to adapt to that at all?
First of all, my part of the ministry while I do go into prisons, is not as much that, because I'm a former legislator from California, I work on criminal justice reform issues with governors, attorney generals, and people like that. But when I do go into prison, no, it's because human beings haven't changed. I'd say all the way back to when Cain killed Abel, the first crime we know of. Sin is at their heart and at the center of their heart, and a lot of them want to change, and they aren't sure how, and we offer them the way out. So no, I have not found that it changes. I think I would say one change: there is a lot stronger Muslim contingent in prisons, and it really is a battle of the faiths. They view us as a weak religion because, we do unto others as we would have them do unto us. Because we do forgive, we do turn the other cheek. And there's sort of a conflict there because under Islam, it's all about power and rules, not about mercy. And while Allah the Merciful is one of his titles, nowhere in there does it say that he has forgiven us, or that there's even sin to forgive from. They're just a bunch of rules, and he can hold you accountable or he can let you off, and it's totally Allah's whim. That's a very different... also, they don't have personal relationships with him. That's not something they seek, whereas our God is personal. We can seek him. He can be part of our lives. Our whole life should really be in communion with him, and they view that as very strange. Allah is this distant, powerful figure that sits in judgment of them only. So there's a conflict of different worldviews inside.
Yeah. It almost sounds as if the training now for your prison fellowship volunteers probably has to be more extensive than ever before, I would imagine.
Well, that's exactly it. They have to know what the inmates are being told to challenge them for being Christians. And, you know, it's funny, the image on TV is so-called jailhouse conversions, that everybody converts, and that's not really the case. I would say in most prisons, maybe 10% of the prisoners are Christian and actively practice their faith. It's not the majority. When we would go out to Bible study, inmates would sit in their windows thumping on the windows, making fun of us for being the so-called Bible thumpers. And, you know, we were held up to derision. You know, that was actually good. That adversity forced us to really think about what our faith is, why it's important to us. Yeah. And frankly, it made us hold ourselves accountable, because all those people were looking for us to be hypocrites, looking for us to, in some way, lose our temper or do something that was, you know, wrong against the rules. They were eager to pounce on that. And so it was really good. It forced us to be accountable to each other for staying on the straight and narrow.
Pat Nolan, Chuck Colson Fellow for the Center for Justice Reform. Thanks for being with us. I appreciate that inside look. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me on.